It started with a letter, the kind that instantly makes your stomach drop before you even open it. A thick white envelope stamped in bold black with the words, Homeowners Association, sat on top of my mail pile like a warning sign. I stood at my kitchen counter, coffee cooling in my hand, and tore it open. The first line hit like a punch. Notice of violation. Unauthorized landscaping. According to the HOA, my front yard garden was in breach of community aesthetics, and I had 10 days to restore it to approved turf grass, or face fines of $100 per day. 10 days to tear out something I had built with my own 2 hands, something that was as much a part of me as my own home. 3 years earlier, my yard had been a lifeless patch of tired, yellowing grass. The kind you water and mow and fertilize, and still, it never looks alive. I'd always wanted a space that actually gave something back. So slowly I turned that patch into a thriving garden. I planted rows of vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, beans, alongside fragrant herbs like basil and rosemary. Native flowers filled the borders, drawing in bees and butterflies. Every week, neighbors would stop to admire the blooms or ask what was ripening that week. Sometimes I'd hand them a basket of cucumbers or a handful of cherry tomatoes. It wasn't just my garden. It had become a small gathering point for the neighborhood. The letter in my hand didn't see any of that. It saw non-conforming landscaping. It saw a disruption to uniform appearance. It saw a violation to be eliminated. The demand was simple: rip it out or pay the price. And the price wasn't just financial. It was the destruction of something I'd poured years of time, effort, and care into. I called the HOA office that afternoon, still half hoping it was some clerical error. A woman at the desk transferred me to the HOA president, a man I had never once spoken to in the 3 years I'd lived there. His voice was flat, bureaucratic. He told me my garden did not align with the community's aesthetic standards and undermined neighborhood harmony. I asked which specific rule I'd broken, and he cited a vague clause about landscaping consistent with neighborhood appearance. No mention of gardens, no ban on vegetables, just enough ambiguity to give them control over anything they didn't like. That night I went online. I wrote a detailed post in the neighborhood Facebook group explaining what had happened. Within hours, the comments started rolling in, most of them furious at the HOA's overreach. People wrote about how they loved walking past my garden, how it brightened their day. One neighbor, Sarah, suggested we start a petition to present to the board. I agreed, and by the end of the week, we had over 150 signatures, more than half the households in the neighborhood. But support alone wasn't enough. I started digging, not in the soil this time, but through paperwork. I pulled up the HOA's governing documents online. Hours turned into nights of reading fine print under a desk lamp. The landscaping rules were as vague as the president had said. Maintained and visually harmonious were the only real requirements. My garden was both. Then I found something even more important: our state's property law. According to it, HOAs could not prohibit vegetable gardens in unfenced yards unless the restriction was explicitly written into the community's original bylaws. I checked. Our bylaws had no such restriction. Legally, they had no ground to stand on. A week later, I walked into the monthly HOA board meeting. The room was small, lit by a buzzing overhead fixture, and every chair was filled. People lined the walls, some standing in the doorway. The board, 5 members in matching polo shirts, looked uneasy at the turnout. I took a seat in the front row with Sarah and a stack of papers in my lap. Before and after photos of my yard, the signed petition, and a highlighted copy of the state law. When my turn came, I stood up and spoke plainly. I showed them what the yard looked like before, a barren lawn, and what it looked like now, a vibrant, well-tended garden that residents actually enjoyed. I handed them the petition and pointed out that the majority of the neighborhood supported keeping it. Then I read the section of state law aloud. My voice didn't shake. I knew I was right. The HOA president leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. He insisted the board still had the authority to set community standards, and warned that if they allowed my garden, it would open the door for others to replace lawns with gravel, car parts, or weeds. Murmurs filled the room. That's when Sarah stood up. She asked everyone in favor of my garden to raise their hands. Nearly every hand went up. The sight of that, the visual proof of community support, none seemed to shake the board. The discussion dragged on for nearly an hour. They debated maintenance standards, property values, even curb appeal. Finally, the board voted 3 in favor of letting me keep the garden, 2 against. The violation notice was withdrawn, but there was more. They agreed to rewrite the landscaping clause to explicitly allow vegetable gardens, provided they were well maintained. My fight had changed the rules for everyone. The next morning, I found a note taped to my gate. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from a neighbor I barely knew. Thank you for standing up for this. You didn't just save your garden. You made this neighborhood better. Over the following months, I saw raised beds appear in front yards up and down the street. Some were small herb gardens. Others were bursts of wildflowers, and a few, like mine, were full-blown vegetable plots. The street felt different, more alive, more personal. It wasn't all smiles, though. A few of the board members avoided me at community events, their polite nods a thin mask for lingering irritation. But I didn't care. Every time I stepped outside and saw a neighbor planting something new, I knew I'd made the right call. By summer's end, my garden had reached its peak. The tomatoes hung heavy on the vine. The basil grew thick and fragrant, and sunflowers towered over the front walk. Children stopped to watch bees dance from bloom to bloom. Cars slowed as they passed, and sometimes strangers would roll down their windows just to say, "Nice garden." Looking back, I realized this fight was never just about plants. It was about control, and whether a group of people could dictate how we express ourselves on our own property. The HOA wanted conformity. What they got instead was a neighborhood united, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of defiance can grow into something far bigger. If your HOA told you to tear out something you love, would you comply or fight back?